You don't belong here, and you certainly can't afford this flight. Security is on its way." Those were the last arrogant words manager Greg Patterson ever spoke with confidence. He stood there, sneering at the calm black couple in the first-class line, convinced he was protecting the integrity of his airline. He thought he was dealing with trespassers. He had no idea that the man he was threatening to ban was quietly buying the entire airline on his phone while they argued. When the notification finally pinged on Greg's tablet, revealing the passenger's net worth and his new title as majority shareholder, the color didn't just drain from Greg's face, it vanished. This is the story of how one man's prejudice led to the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The automatic doors of JFK's Terminal 4 slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting a gust of biting November wind and the chaotic symphony of holiday travel. David and Salome Thompson stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the warmth of the terminal, but instantly on guard. They were dressed for comfort, not for a runway show. David wore a charcoal gray hoodie and well-worn joggers, his favorite pair of Nikes scuffed from months of travel. Salome was wrapped in a beige, oversized cardigan, her hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun, pushing a stroller that held their sleeping 2-year-old daughter, Maya. To the untrained eye, or the prejudiced one, they looked like they had just rolled out of bed to catch a budget red-eye. To those who knew better, the details whispered a different story. The hoodie was cashmere, custom-milled in Italy. The stroller was a limited edition bugaboo that cost more than most used cars. And the watch peeking out from under David's sleeve was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, worth roughly $30 million. But Greg Patterson, the shift manager for Apex Airways, was not a man who noticed details. He was a man who noticed skin color and attire, and in his mind, the calculation was simple. Black plus sweatpants equals economy class. Probably basic economy. David pushed the luggage cart, piled high with 3 large Rimowa trunks. They were flying to the Swiss Alps for a month-long retreat. It had been a grueling year for David's tech firm, Obsidian Systems, which had just closed a confidential merger with a government defense contractor. He needed the snow, the silence, and the fondue. "Babe, you hold the passports?" David asked, his voice low and rumbling, a calm anchor in the sea of frantic travelers. Salome tapped her crossbody bag. "Right here. Digital boarding passes are up too. I just want to get to the lounge." "I need coffee, David, intravenous amounts of coffee." David chuckled, steering the cart toward the far right of the check-in counters. A velvet red rope cordoned off a plush crimson carpet that led to 3 dedicated desks. The sign above them gleamed in gold lettering: Apex Royal First Class and Diplomatic Services. While the regular economy lines snaked back and forth like a labyrinth of misery, the Royal First lane was empty. A single agent stood behind the desk, typing idly. However, standing in front of the lane, guarding the entrance like a nightclub bouncer, was Greg. Greg Patterson was a man in his late 40s who wore his polyester uniform, a size too tight, perhaps to emphasize a non-existent muscular build. His name tag gleamed, polished to a mirror finish, and he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, rocking on his heels. He scanned the crowd with a predator's gaze, looking for oversized bags to charge or confused tourists to redirect. When he saw David and Salome approaching the red carpet, his eyes narrowed. He didn't just see passengers, he saw an anomaly, a disruption to his aesthetic. David didn't notice the stare at first. He was busy checking his phone, reviewing a final email from his CFO, Marcus. "Transfer complete. Waiting on SEC filing? You're good to go." "Excuse me," David said politely, moving to bypass Greg to get to the counter. Greg sidestepped, blocking the path. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the standard, "Welcome to Apex." Instead, he held up a hand, palm out, fingers splayed in a stop gesture that was borderline aggressive. "Whoa, hold on there, folks," Greg said, his voice dripping with a saccharine, condescending tone. "You're in the wrong place. Economy check-in is rows 1 through 15. Follow the blue signs. This area is for first-class passengers only." David stopped the cart. The wheels squeaked on the polished floor. He looked up from his phone, his expression mild. He was used to this. It was the tax of presence he paid almost everywhere he went. "We know," David said, his voice even. "We're flying first." Greg let out a short, sharp laugh, more of a bark. He looked David up and down, making a show of inspecting the hoodie, the joggers, and then Salim's messy bun. He shook his head, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "Look, buddy," Greg said, dropping the customer service facade entirely. "I don't have time for jokes today. We have a senator flying out in 20 minutes and I need this lane clear. I'm not going to tell you again. Take the cart, turn around, and go wait in the general boarding line like everyone else. If you hurry, you might check your bags before the cutoff." Salome stepped forward, the stroller handle gripped tight in her hands. She was tired. She was a pediatric neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins, and she had just come off a 3-6-hour shift before packing for this trip. Her patience for fools was non-existent. "We aren't joking," Salome said, her voice sharp. "We have tickets. Now, please move aside so we can check in. Our daughter is sleeping, and I'd like to get her settled in the lounge." Greg's face hardened. He took a step closer, invading their personal space. "I've been working this desk for 12 years, ma'am. I know what our first-class clientele looks like. They wear suits, they carry briefcases, they don't look like they just came from a pickup basketball game." He gestured vaguely at David. "Now, I can call security and have you escorted to the back of the line, or you can leave voluntarily. Do not try to scam your way into the priority lane. It's embarrassing for you." David took a deep breath. He felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the ancestral anger of being told you don't belong. But he was also a businessman, a master of negotiation and strategy. Getting angry gave the other person power. David preferred to keep the power. "My name is David Thompson," David said, holding his ground. "This is my wife, Dr. Salome Thompson. We are booked on flight 402 to Zurich, seats 1A and 1B. If you would simply look at your manifest or let us approach the counter, you would see that." Greg rolled his eyes, a gesture so unprofessional it was almost comical. "Thompson? Yeah, sure. Look, I'm not checking the manifest because I don't need to. I'm spotting a security risk. 2 individuals, looking disheveled, trying to bypass security protocols and access a high-value target area? Yeah, that's a red flag." "Disheveled?" Salome asked, incredulous. "I'm wearing a $1,200 cardigan. It looks like a bathrobe." Greg spat back. "And frankly, your attitude is confirming my suspicions. You're aggressive. You're not complying with airline staff instructions. That's grounds for a denial of service right there." David pulled his phone out again. "I'm going to show you my boarding pass," he said slowly, telegraphing his movements so Greg wouldn't claim he was reaching for a weapon. "It's right here on the Apex app." "Put the phone away," Greg snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of travelers in the nearby economy line. Heads turned. A few people pulled out their own phones, sensing a viral moment. "I told you to leave the area. You are now trespassing in a restricted zone. I am the senior shift manager, and I am ordering you to vacate the premises immediately." "You want us to leave the airport?" David asked, his eyebrows raising. "I want you out of my first-class line," Greg hissed. "Go to the kiosk, print your economy tickets, wait in the snake line. If you come back over here, I will have the airport police ban you from flying Apex for life. Do you understand me? For life." David looked at Salome. They shared a silent communication, a look that said, "Can you believe this guy?" Salome sighed, leaning down to check on Maya, who stirred but didn't wake. "David," she whispered, "just call the concierge line. Don't waste your breath on him." "No," David said softly. "I want to see how far he takes this." David turned back to Greg. He stood up to his full height, 6'3", towering over the manager. "Okay, Greg, I see your name tag. Greg Patterson. You're making a mistake. A very expensive one. I'm asking you one last time to scan my boarding pass. If you refuse, I'm going to have to make a phone call you really don't want me to make." Greg laughed again, louder this time, playing to the audience of onlookers. "Oh, a phone call. Is that right? Who are you going to call? Your boys? You going to bring a gang down here to intimidate me?" The racism was so casual, so blatant, that the air around them seemed to freeze. The agent behind the first-class desk, a young woman named Jessica, looked up with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable. She opened her mouth to speak, but Greg shot her a silencing glare. "I'm going to call the owner of this airline," David said calmly. Greg exploded with laughter, slapping his thigh. "The owner? Oh, that's rich. You know, Richard Branson or something? Kid, Apex is a publicly traded company owned by a holding group. There is no owner you can just call. You're delusional. That's it. Greg grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. He depressed the button, his eyes locking onto David's with malicious glee. Security to Terminal 4, Apex Royal Desk. I have 2 non-compliant passengers refusing to vacate the premium area. Potential hostile situation, requesting immediate backup. He released the button and smirked. Game over, Thompson. You're not flying to Zurich. You're not flying anywhere. You're going to a holding cell. David didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He simply unlocked his phone, tapped the contacts icon, and scrolled down to a number saved simply as Board of Directors, Chair. Well, Salome, David said, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. Looks like we're buying an airline today. Please don't buy the whole thing, Salome muttered, adjusting the baby's blanket. Just buy enough to fire him. We'll see, David said, pressing the call button. Greg crossed his arms, smug satisfaction radiating off him. He had no idea that the signal from David's phone was currently bouncing off a satellite and connecting directly to the private cell of Elias Thorne, the chairman of the board for Apex Airways, a man who had been begging David to invest for months. The drama was just beginning. David held the phone to his ear, his gaze never leaving Greg's face. The line rang twice before it was picked up. David, to what do I owe the pleasure? The voice on the other end was booming and warm. Elias Thorne, the chairman of Apex Airways. I thought you were taking a sabbatical? Don't tell me you're calling to talk about the quarterly projections. I am taking a sabbatical, Elias, David said, his voice smooth and conversational, contrasting sharply with the tension in the terminal. Or at least, I'm trying to. I'm currently standing at your check-in counter at JFK Terminal 4. Greg scoffed loudly. He's faking it, he announced to the crowd, pointing a finger at David. He's talking to his voicemail. Classic con artist move. David ignored him. Elias, do you remember that offer you made last month? The one about the controlling stake? You said the board was looking for a visionary to steer the ship away from the impending bankruptcy. On the other end of the line, the jovial tone vanished, replaced by sharp business acuity. I remember. We need liquidity, David, and we need your tech integration. Are you saying you're interested? I'm saying I'm buying it, David said. Right now. But I have one condition. Name it, Elias said instantly. I need full executive clearance pushed to the terminal systems immediately. Specifically, to the terminal manager's tablet at JFK. I want my profile updated to reflect the new ownership structure before I board. Done, Elias said. I'll call IT and legal. Give me 3 minutes. Welcome to Apex, David. The line clicked dead. David slipped the phone back into his pocket. At that exact moment, 2 airport police officers arrived on Segways, weaving through the crowd. They dismounted, hands resting near their belts, looking weary. The lead officer, a burly man named Officer Miller, looked from Greg to David. What seems to be the problem here, Greg? Miller asked. He sounded like he had dealt with Greg before and wasn't particularly fond of him. Officer Miller, thank God, Greg exclaimed, rushing forward like a victim. These 2 are refusing to leave a restricted area. I've identified them as a security risk. They're aggressive, belligerent, and I suspect the male is intoxicated. He's been making threatening phone calls. Miller turned to David. He took in the calm stance, the sleeping baby, and the wife who looked ready to murder someone with a glare. Sir, Miller said, stepping toward David. Is this true? Do you have a ticket for this flight? I do, David said politely. I'm in seat 1A. But Mr. Patterson here refused to look at my boarding pass because he believes I can't afford it. Miller sighed. Greg, did you scan their pass? I don't need to scan it, Greg shouted, his face turning a mottled red. Look at them. They're obviously scammers. And now he's claiming he bought the airline. He's mentally unstable, Miller. I want them trespassed. Get them out of my terminal. Miller looked at David. Sir, if you could just show me your ID and boarding pass, we can clear this up. I'd be happy to, David said. He reached for his phone again. Don't let him reach, Greg shrieked. He could have a weapon. Miller held up a hand to silence Greg. Let the man show me his pass, Greg. Calm down. David opened the Apex app. But before he could hand the phone to the officer, a strange sound echoed from behind the check-in desk. It was a chiming sound, not a standard notification beep, but a melodious, multi-tone alert that sounded like a fanfare. It came from Jessica's computer. Then, Greg's tablet, which he held clutched in his sweaty hand, vibrated violently. It let out the same chime. Ping, ping, ping. Every screen at the first-class counter flickered. The standard blue Apex logo dissolved, replaced by a sleek, shimmering gold screen. "What is that?" Greg muttered, looking down at his tablet. "System glitch. Piece of junk technology." He tapped the screen to clear the error. It didn't clear. Instead, a massive notification box popped up, covering the entire display. It was a critical update alert, usually reserved for grounding flights or terrorist threats. Alert. VIP status override subject. Thompson. David loyalty tier. Updating. Greg frowned, squinting at the screen. Thompson? That's you? He looked up at David, confusion warring with his arrogance. "Keep reading," David said softly. The screen refreshed. The loyalty tier field, which usually said gold, platinum, or diamond, flashed rapidly. It cycled through the options, and then settled on a designation Greg had never seen in his 12 years of employment. Loyalty tier. Owner. Majority shareholder flags. Do not disturb. Total clearance. Below that, a financial snapshot appeared, a feature Apex introduced to help managers identify high-value whales to upsell. Usually, it showed estimated annual spend, $50K. On David's profile, the numbers rolled like a slot machine. Net worth. $3.2 billion, verified. Current holdings. Apex Airways, 51%. Greg froze. The noise of the terminal, the announcements, the crying babies, the luggage wheels seemed to drop away. He stared at the number. Billion, with a B. He looked at the photo on the profile. It was David, wearing a tuxedo, smiling confidently. He looked up at the man in front of him, wearing the gray hoodie. It was the same face. Greg's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain was trying to process the impossibility of the situation. The thug he was about to have arrested was his boss. No, he was his boss's boss's boss. He was the man who owned the pavement Greg was standing on. "Is there a problem, Greg?" David asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that crushed the air out of Greg's lungs. "Officer Miller asked you a question. Did you scan my pass?" Officer Miller leaned over Greg's shoulder to look at the tablet. He let out a low whistle. "Holy mother of," Miller muttered. He looked at David, then straightened up and adjusted his uniform, suddenly standing at attention. "Mr. Thompson, my apologies, sir. I didn't realize who you were." "You didn't know," David said kindly to the officer. "You were doing your job. Unlike Manager Patterson here." Greg's hands began to shake. The tablet slipped from his sweaty fingers and clattered onto the floor. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at David, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure melting in the heat. I, Greg stammered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a primal, icy terror. "Mr. Thompson, the system." It didn't say. The system didn't need to say anything. Salome spoke up, stepping forward. She wasn't shouting, but her voice was cold steel. "You judged us the moment we walked in. You saw a black man in a hoodie, and you decided he was a criminal. You didn't check your list? You didn't check your bias? I was just following protocol," Greg whispered, his voice cracking. "Protocol?" David took a step closer. The crowd had gone silent, sensing the shift in power. "Is it protocol to threaten a customer? Is it protocol to call the police on a family with a sleeping child? Or is that just your protocol, Greg?" David reached down and picked up the tablet from the floor. He dusted it off and held it out to Greg. "Take it," David ordered. Greg reached out with a trembling hand and took the device. "Now," David said, his voice hard, "unlock the terminal, print our boarding passes. And then, Greg, we need to have a little talk about your future. Or lack thereof." Greg fumbled with the passcode, typing it wrong twice before finally unlocking it. He tapped the print button, his movements jerky and robotic. The printer behind the desk whirred to life. Jessica, the agent, quickly grabbed the passes and ran around the desk. She offered them to David with two hands, bowing slightly. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, welcome aboard. I am so sorry for the delay. Please, Allow me to escort you to the lounge personally. David took the passes. He smiled at Jessica. Thank you, Jessica. You've been very patient. He turned back to Greg. Greg was staring at his shoes, unable to meet David's eyes. Officer Miller, David said. Yes, sir? I'd like to file a report regarding harassment. I want it on record. Absolutely, sir, Miller said, pulling out his notebook. He shot Greg a look of pure pity. I'll take the statement right here. Good, David said. He looked at Greg. Don't go anywhere, Greg. I'm going to go get my daughter some milk. When I come back, I expect the regional director to be here. I believe you know his number? Greg nodded weakly. He looked like he was about to be sick. David turned to Salome, gave her a wink, and began to push the stroller past the red velvet rope. The crowd, realizing what had just happened, erupted into whispers and pointing. Someone in the back started slow clapping, and it rippled through the line. But the drama wasn't over. As David walked toward the lounge, a man in a sharp Italian suit came running down the concourse, breathless and frantic. It was the regional director, who had evidently been alerted by the system override. And he looked furious, not at David, at Greg. The regional director, a man named Peter Viviana, skidded to a halt in front of the first-class desk. He was a man who prided himself on control. His suits were pressed. His hair was lacquered into place, and his smile was usually fixed. But right now, Peter Viviana looked like a man watching a bomb countdown reach zero. He ignored Greg entirely, rushing past the frozen manager to extend a trembling hand toward David. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson. I am Peter Viviana, the Northeast Regional Director for Apex. I was on the phone with Chairman Thorne when the acquisition alert came through. I ran all the way from Terminal 2. He paused, gasping for breath, sweat beading on his forehead. On behalf of the entire Apex family, I want to offer my humblest, most sincere apologies for whatever has occurred here. David shook the man's hand, his grip firm but brief. Mr. Viviana, you look winded. You should take better care of your heart, especially given the stress your staff puts you under. Peter paled. He turned slowly to look at Greg Patterson. Greg was still standing by the counter, holding the tablet like a shield. The color had not returned to his face. He looked like a ghost haunting his own workplace. Patterson, Peter said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. What did you do? Sir, Greg stammered, his eyes darting around. I was following security protocols. They looked suspicious. The hoodie, the bags. I thought they were bypassing the line. Suspicious? Salome interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. She rocked the stroller gently. We showed him our boarding passes. He refused to look. We offered ID. He refused to look. He threatened to ban us for life and called the police because he didn't believe we could afford the seats. Peter closed his eyes, as if physically pained by the stupidity. You threatened the new majority shareholder. With a ban? I didn't know, Greg cried out, his voice shrill. How could I know? Look at him. He doesn't look like a shareholder. He looks like Like a what, Greg? David asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Go on. Finish the sentence. I own 51% of the company now. I think I'm entitled to hear what your employees really think of me. Greg's mouth clamped shut. He knew there was no word he could say that wouldn't dig his grave deeper. Just then, the commotion at the terminal entrance grew louder. A phalanx of assistants and security guards swept through the automatic doors, clearing a path. In the center of the group strode Senator Tom Reynolds, the very VIP Greg had been so desperate to clear the lane for. Senator Reynolds was a silver-haired, charismatic man known for his tough stance on crime and his love for luxury. Greg's eyes lit up. This was his salvation. He had served the senator for years. They had a rapport, or so Greg thought. Senator Reynolds, Greg called out, stepping around the desk, ignoring Peter's glare. He waved his arms. Over here, sir. I've been trying to keep the lane clear for you, but these people... Senator Reynolds stopped. He looked at Greg, then he looked past him. His eyes widened. A genuine, broad smile broke across his face, completely ignoring the frantic manager. David? The senator boomed. David Thompson? Is that you? Greg froze mid-step. David turned, his expression brightening. Tom, I haven't seen you since the charity gala in D.C. The senator bypassed Greg as if he were a piece of furniture, walking straight to David and clasping him in a bear hug. "Good to see you, son. I heard about the Obsidian merger. Congratulations. You're making us all look like paupers." He looked down at the stroller. "And this must be the little one? And the lovely Dr. Thompson?" "Good to see you, Senator," Salome said, smiling politely. Greg stood there, his arms still half raised in a wave that no one wanted. His mouth hung open. The world was tilting on its axis. The man he was protecting the lane for was friends with the man he was kicking out. "Tom, I wish we could catch up," David said, his tone turning serious. "But unfortunately, your favorite airline manager here was just in the middle of having me arrested." Senator Reynolds pulled back, his smile vanishing. He turned his steely gaze onto Greg. "Patterson? What is David talking about?" Senator, I was just safety first, you know?" Greg tried to smile, but it looked more like a rictus of terror. "Just a misunderstanding. He told us we didn't belong in the first-class line," Salome added helpfully. "He said we should go wait in the snake line with the other people." The senator's face darkened. He wasn't just a politician. He was a man who relied on public image. Being associated with a racist incident was political suicide. "Patterson," the senator said coldly, "I've flown Apex for 10 years. David Thompson is one of the most respected innovators in this country. If you treated him like this, how have you been treating my constituents, who aren't billionaires?" "I treat everyone with respect." Greg lied, sweat pouring down his neck. "That's not true," a voice piped up from the economy line. A young woman stepped forward. "Last week you made me check my carry-on because you said it was too bulky. But you let the guy behind me pass with a guitar case." "Yeah," shouted a man from the back. "And you yelled at my grandmother for walking too slow." Suddenly, the floodgates opened. The crowd, emboldened by David's stand, started shouting out their grievances. Greg Patterson wasn't just a strict manager. He was a tyrant who had been bullying travelers for a decade. Peter Viviano looked at the mob, then at the senator, and finally at his new boss, David. He realized he had to act fast to save his own skin. "Greg," Peter barked, "give me your badge, now." Greg clutched his chest. My badge? But Peter, I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in private school." "You should have thought about that before you profiled my boss," Peter hissed. "Hand it over. You are suspended pending a formal investigation." "No," David interrupted. Everyone turned to David. "No?" Peter asked, confused. "Sir, I assure you, we will terminate him." "Oh, I want him fired," David said calmly, "but not yet. If you fire him now, he goes home. He hides. He plays the victim." David took a step toward Greg, his voice dropping to a whisper that only the people in the immediate circle could hear. "I checked the flight manifest, Greg. The flight to Zurich is full. Every seat, except for 2 jump seats in the galley." Greg stared at him, trembling. "You're going to work this flight," David said. "You're not going to manage it. You're not going to be in charge. You are going to serve. Specifically, you are going to serve me. I want to see if you can learn the meaning of the word service when the power dynamic is flipped." I can't," Greg whispered. It's humiliating. "More humiliating than being threatened with jail in front of your daughter?" David asked, his eyes hard as flint. "You have 2 choices, Greg. Get on the plane and do your job as a flight attendant assistant, or I press charges for harassment and I sue you personally for defamation. I have the best lawyers in New York. I will tie you up in court until your great-grandchildren are paying off your legal fees." Greg looked at the senator, who looked away. He looked at Peter, who nodded grimly. He looked at the police officer, who just shrugged. I'll get my bag," Greg whispered, defeated. "Good," David said. "Don't keep us waiting. We have a schedule to keep." The Apex Royal Lounge was a sanctuary of silence and gold leaf. It smelled of espresso and expensive perfume. David and Salome settled into a private alcove overlooking the tarmac. Maya had finally woken up and was happily munching on a croissant. David, however, was not relaxing. He had his laptop open and was typing furiously. "Are you actually buying the airline?" Salome asked, sipping her cappuccino. "Or was that just for show?" "Oh, I bought it," David said without looking up. "The transfer is in escrow. It's a good investment, actually. The stock is undervalued because management is incompetent. Case in point. Greg, you're really going to make him serve us?" Salome asked, a small smile playing on her lips. That's a bit Old Testament of you. He needs to understand, David said. He sees people as tiers. Gold, silver, garbage. He needs to feel what it's like to be at the bottom. Meanwhile, down in the staff locker room, Greg Patterson was not learning his lesson. He was hyperventilating. He had stripped off his manager's blazer and squeezed into the spare flight attendant vest Peter had thrown at him. It was 2 sizes too small. He stared at himself in the mirror. His face was blotchy, his eyes were red. But underneath the fear, a kernel of rage was hardening. He can't do this to me, Greg thought. I am the senior manager. I run this terminal. Who does he think he is? Just because he has money? He pulled out his phone. He still had access to the back-end scheduling system. Peter hadn't revoked his credentials yet. Greg's fingers flew across the screen. He navigated to the seating chart for Flight 402. He saw Thompson, D, and Thompson, S in 1A and 1B. The best seats on the plane. The enclosed suites. Oops, Greg thought, a malicious grin twisting his face. System error. He tapped the screen, reassigning their seats. He couldn't move them to economy, the system blocked that for VIPs. But he could mark the seats as broken, inoperable. If the seats were broken, protocol dictated they had to be moved. If first was full, they would have to be downgraded or bumped to another flight. Even the owner couldn't fly in a seat deemed legally unsafe by the FAA. Greg marked 1A and 1B as mechanism failure, safety hazard. He hit save. Enjoy the middle seat in business, Mr. Billionaire, Greg muttered to himself. He felt a petty rush of victory. He knew he was going down, but he wanted to land one last punch. He straightened his vest, washed his face, and marched out to the gate. 30 minutes later, boarding began. David and Salome approached the gate agent, a cheerful woman named Brenda. Greg was standing behind her, scanning tickets, refusing to make eye contact with David. David handed his boarding pass to Brenda. She scanned it. The machine let out a loud, angry buzz. A red light flashed. "Oh," Brenda said, frowning. "That's odd. Mr. Thompson, it says here there's a maintenance hold on your suite, seat 1A. The recline mechanism is flagged as hazardous." Greg kept his head down, suppressing a smirk. "Gotcha. Hazardous?" David asked. "That's strange. The plane just arrived from London. The inbound report showed all green." "I know," Brenda said, tapping her keyboard. "It looks like the tag was added 10 minutes ago. By User G. Patterson." Brenda stopped. She slowly turned to look at Greg. David looked at Greg too. The silence at the gate was deafening. "Greg," David said, his voice deceptively light. "Did you sabotage my seat?" Greg's head snapped up. "No. I was doing a final safety check. I noticed a loose bolt. I was just protecting you, sir. Safety is our #1 priority." "A loose bolt," David repeated. "In 10 minutes? While you were in the locker room changing?" I have reports," Greg lied, digging deeper. "The cleaning crew told me." David sighed. He turned to Brenda. "Brenda, override the hold." "I can't, sir," Brenda said apologetically. "Once it's in the FAA log, a mechanic has to physically sign it off. It could take an hour. We'd miss our slot." Greg's internal smirk grew into a beam of triumph. He had delayed the flight. He had inconvenienced the billionaire. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. "Well," Greg said, feigning concern, "it looks like we might have to rebook you, Mr. Thompson. Or, there are 2 seats in row 40. Near the lavatory." David looked at Greg. He saw the gleam in the man's eye. He realized exactly what Greg had done. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" David asked softly. David pulled out his phone again. He didn't call the chairman this time. He opened an app that controlled the Obsidian Systems smart grid, the technology his company had just sold to the government, and which Apex Airways used for their fleet maintenance tracking. "I built the software you're using to lie to me, Greg," David said. He tapped 3 times. "I am accessing the seat sensors in real time. 1A and 1B are fully functional. Pressure sensors normal. Motor voltage normal." David turned the screen to show Brenda. "See? No errors." "I see it," Brenda said, amazed. "Now," David continued, his fingers moving fast, "I am going to check the user logs. Ah, here it is. Manual entry, G. Patterson. 10:14 a.m. Location: staff locker room, B-Drim. David looked up. You flagged a safety hazard from the locker room toilet, Greg? That is a federal offense. Falsifying maintenance records. Greg's knees buckled. Officer Miller is still at the top of the jet bridge, David noted. I could have you arrested right now for interfering with flight operations. Please, Greg whimpered. Please don't. Then fix it, David said. Not in the computer. I've already cleared the code. I mean, fix the situation. You are going to personally escort us to our seats, you are going to stow our bags, and you are going to apologize to my wife for wasting her time. And if you make one more mistake, one more tiny slip-up, I will have you walked off this plane in handcuffs at 30,000 feet if I have to divert to Iceland to do it. Greg nodded rapidly, tears pricking his eyes. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. He grabbed David's heavy Rimowa carry-on. He struggled with the weight, his polyester vest straining. After you, Mr. Patterson, Salome said, gesturing to the jet bridge. Greg trudged down the tunnel, the heavy bag banging against his shins, leading the people he hated most into the luxury he could never afford. Flight 402 was an Airbus A350, a masterpiece of engineering. The first-class cabin was a haven of soft leather, walnut, wood, and ambient lighting. There were only 8 suites. David and Salome settled into 1A and 1B. Greg, sweating profusely, heaved their bags into the overhead bins. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped Salome's bag onto the floor. Careful, David warned, not looking up from the menu. That bag contains surgical loops. If you break them, that's another 20 grand you owe me. Sorry, Greg muttered. The actual flight attendants, watched this with wide eyes. The purser, a stern but professional woman named Maria, had been briefed by the captain. She knew exactly who David was, and she knew Greg was on thin ice. Maria walked over to David. Mr. Thompson, welcome aboard. Captain Evans asked me to extend his personal welcome. He says the flight time is 7 hours. Thank you, Maria, David said. Actually, yes. I'd like to hold a brief staff meeting before takeoff. Since I own the airline, I figure I should meet the crew. Of course, Maria said. I'll gather everyone in the galley. And Greg, David added, make sure Greg is there. 5 minutes later, the crew of 12 stood in the front galley. They looked nervous but curious. Greg stood at the back, trying to make himself invisible. David stood before them. He didn't look like an arrogant tycoon. He looked like a leader. Hi everyone, David said warmly. I know this is unorthodox. My name is David. This is Salome. We aren't here to make your jobs harder. In fact, I bought this airline because I think the staff is its best asset, usually. He glanced at Greg. I want you all to know that starting today, we are implementing a new pay structure. A 15% raise for all cabin crew, effective immediately. Gasps of shock and joy filled the galley. One flight attendant covered her mouth. You guys work hard, David said. You deal with delays, turbulence, and difficult passengers. You deserve to be paid for it. However, we are also implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. If I hear of any employee judging a passenger by how they look, speak, or dress, they will be out the door before the plane lands. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The crew chorused, beaming. They were already in love with the new boss. Good, David said. Now, Greg. The crew parted, revealing Greg huddled in the corner. Greg is going to be observing today, David said. Actually, he's going to be the dedicated attendant for Suite 1. He wants to learn the ropes of customer service from the ground up. Maria, please supervise him. If he tries to hide in the galley, let me know. Maria smirked. She had clashed with Greg many times over his scheduling demands. With pleasure, Mr. Thompson. All right, let's go to Zurich, David said. The meeting broke up. The crew went to their stations, buzzing with the news of the raise. Greg was left standing alone with Maria. Here, Maria said, shoving a tray of hot towels into Greg's hands. Suite 1 needs these. And Greg? Make sure they are steaming, not scalding. Mr. Thompson has sensitive hands. Greg stared at the towels. He felt a tear slide down his cheek. He had been a manager. He had an office. Now he was a towel boy. He walked out into the cabin. David was reclining in his seat, watching a movie. Hot towel, sir? Greg asked, his voice a broken whisper. David paused the movie. He looked at the towel, Then he looked at Greg. "Thank you, Greg," David said politely. He took the towel. "Oh, and Greg, I need you to do something for me." "Yes, sir?" "My daughter needs her diaper changed. The changing table in the front lavatory is a bit tricky to set up. Salome is tired. I'd like you to go prep the room, sanitize the table, and stand by to assist with the disposal." Greg's stomach churned. "Assist with the disposal?" "Yes," David said, his eyes twinkling with a hard light. "I wouldn't want to get my hands dirty. I'm just a shareholder, after all." Greg swallowed hard. "Right away, sir." As Greg walked toward the lavatory, the fasten seatbelt sign chimed. The plane began its pushback. Greg was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet with the man he had tried to destroy, and the flight had only just begun. But the real twist was yet to come. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, a notification popped up on the in-flight Wi-Fi. It was an email to all Apex employees. Subject: Management restructuring from David Thompson, CEO. Greg's phone buzzed in his pocket. He shouldn't have checked it, but he couldn't help himself. He pulled it out in the galley. He read the email. His eyes widened. It wasn't just a restructuring. It was an audit, a forensic audit of all manager-level expenses for the last 5 years. Greg dropped the phone. He had been skimming cash from the oversized baggage fees for 3 years. He called it his commission. He thought no one checked the cash receipts. David Thompson was a tech mogul. His company specialized in data forensics. Greg looked out the porthole at the shrinking city of New York. He realized with a jolt of nausea that when this plane landed, losing his job would be the least of his worries. He wasn't just serving a billionaire. He was serving the man who was about to send him to prison. The cabin was dimmed to a soothing twilight blue. Most passengers were asleep, lulled by the hum of the engines as Flight 402 cruised at 38,000 feet over the dark Atlantic. David was awake, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. He was reviewing the forensic data his team back in New York had just finished compiling. In the galley, Greg Patterson was pacing in the tight space between the coffee makers and the ovens. He felt like a rat in a cage. The email about the audit was burning a hole in his mind. 5 years of expenses. He had thought he was so clever charging passengers for excess weight in cash when the credit card machines were down, then pocketing the difference. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $50,000 over the years, but it was enough to constitute felony embezzlement. He needed to get ahead of this. He needed to beg. Greg smoothed his vest, wiped the sweat from his upper lip, and stepped into the quiet cabin. He walked to seat 1A. "Mr. Thompson?" he whispered. David didn't look up from his screen. "I didn't ring the call button, Greg." "I know, sir. I saw the email, the one about the audit." Greg knelt by the seat, lowering himself so he wasn't looming over the boss. It was a submissive posture, one he had forced countless customers to take when begging him to waive a fee. "Ah," David said, finally turning to look at him. "The audit?" "Concerned?" "Sir, I wanted to be honest with you," Greg stammered, his voice trembling. "There might be some irregularities in my paperwork. Sometimes things get busy, you know? Cash handling is tricky. I just didn't want you to think." David held up a hand. He turned his laptop screen toward Greg. "Greg, stop," David said quietly. "You're insulting my intelligence, again." Greg looked at the screen. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a visualization graph from Obsidian Systems. It showed a pattern of red dots associated with Greg's login ID. "My company builds fraud detection AI for the Department of Defense," David explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "It took my algorithm less than 4 minutes to find your scheme. You flag bags as overweight, demand cash for a discounted rate to help the passenger out, and then you override the weight in the system later. You've stolen $42,000 from this airline, Greg. And you've targeted almost exclusively elderly people and minorities. People you thought wouldn't complain." Greg felt the blood leave his head. He gripped the armrest to keep from collapsing. I can pay it back. I have savings. Please, Mr. Thompson, I have a family." "So did the grandmother you shouted at last week," David said. "So did the students you extorted." "I'll do anything," Greg pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll resign. I'll walk away. Just don't involve the police." David looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You don't get it, do you? If you had just done your job today, if you had just been decent, you might have gotten away with it for another 10 years. I wouldn't have looked at the books. I wouldn't have bought the airline. Your prejudice was the flare that signaled your location. You destroyed yourself, Greg. I'm just the witness. Suddenly, the plane jolted. A sharp drop in altitude threw Greg against the bulkhead. The fastened seatbelt light pinged on with an urgent chime. Cabin crew, take your seats immediately, the captain's voice boomed over the intercom. We have unexpected clear air turbulence. Sit down, Greg, David ordered, turning back to his work. Buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. In every sense of the word. Greg stumbled back to the jump seat near the cockpit door. He strapped himself in, facing the cabin. He looked out at the sleeping passengers, the people he had viewed as cattle for so long. Now, he was the one being led to the slaughter. For the next 2 hours, Greg sat in the dark, vibrating with every shake of the plane, terrified of the destination. He realized that the luxury he had coveted, the power he had abused, was gone. When the wheels touched the ground, his life, as he knew it, was over. The descent into Zurich was smooth, the sun rising over the snow-capped Alps, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. It was a beautiful morning for everyone except Greg Patterson. As the plane taxied to the gate, Maria, the purser, picked up the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zurich. On behalf of Apex Airways and our new owner, Mr. David Thompson, we thank you for flying with us. We hope you have a wonderful stay. The passengers applauded a rare occurrence. They knew something special had happened on this flight. David stood up and stretched. Salome woke Maya, who was refreshed and giggling. Greg unbuckled his seatbelt, his limbs feeling heavy and numb. He moved to the main door, preparing to perform the standard disarm procedure. He hoped, prayed, that he could just slip away. Maybe he could blend into the crowd in the terminal, find a train, and disappear. He cracked the door open, and the jet bridge extended to meet the fuselage. The cool, crisp Swiss air rushed in. Greg stepped back to let the passengers off. But the first people to step onto the plane were not ground crew. 2 officers in the distinct blue uniforms of the Kantonspolizei Zurich Cantonal Police, stepped aboard. They were flanked by a man in a suit holding a briefcase. Greg froze. He tried to back into the galley, but he bumped into the food cart. Mr. Gregory Patterson? The lead officer asked, his accent thick but precise. Greg couldn't speak. He just nodded. We have been contacted by the legal department of Apex Airways regarding an urgent matter of corporate theft and fraud, the officer said. We have a warrant to detain you pending extradition procedures to the United States. The officer stepped forward and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The click of the metal locking around Greg's wrists echoed in the silent cabin. David and Salome walked up from behind the police. David was wearing his sunglasses now, carrying Maya in one arm. Officer. David nodded to the policeman. Thank you for your prompt response. Of course, Herr Thompson, the officer replied respectfully. Greg looked at David, his eyes wide with shock. You called them from the air? Wi-Fi is a wonderful thing, Greg, David said calmly. I told you. I don't tolerate thieves. David leaned in close, so only Greg could hear. You tried to ban me from a lounge because of my hoodie, David whispered. Now you're going to a place where everyone wears the same jumpsuit. Think about that. The officers took Greg by the arms and led him off the plane. He walked past the passengers he had served, head bowed in shame. David turned to Maria and the rest of the crew, who were watching in stunned silence. Maria, David said, you handled the flight beautifully. As of today, I'm promoting you to station manager for JFK. I need someone there who knows what actual service looks like. Maria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Mr. Thompson, thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't, David smiled. And Jessica, the agent at the check-in desk? Make her your deputy. She was the only one who treated us like humans before the money showed up. Done, Maria said, beaming. David and Salome walked down the jet bridge, the stroller wheels gliding smoothly. They cleared customs in record time, greeted by the Swiss airport director who was eager to please the new aviation mogul. As they stepped out of the terminal and into the blinding white snow of the Swiss winter, a black Mercedes van pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door. Salome looked back at the airport. You know, she said, adjusting her scarf. That was an expensive flight. David laughed, helping Maya into the car. We got the airline, we got the bad guy, And we got a vacation. I'd say it was a bargain. He looked at his phone. The stock price of Apex Airways had jumped 12% since the news of the acquisition, and the management cleanup leaked to the press. Besides, David added, getting into the car, I just made back the purchase price in stock equity. The car door closed, shutting out the cold, and drove off toward the mountains, leaving the chaos and Greg Patterson far behind. And that, my friends, is why you never, ever judge a book by its cover or a billionaire by his hoodie. Greg Patterson spent years thinking his uniform gave him the right to look down on people, but in the end, it was his own arrogance that stripped him of everything. David didn't just buy an airline. He bought justice for every person who had ever been mistreated by a bully with a badge. It's a powerful reminder that true power doesn't need to shout, and real wealth doesn't always wear a suit. Karma has a funny way of checking your flight status when you least expect it. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and high-flying justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories about arrogant people getting exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video.